Thank you, Mark. Hello to everyone, and thank you so much for attending our first PACCIN chat. I'm excited about this new form of programming that we're able to offer. As everyone's experienced recently, the world and the way we move about it has changed dramatically due to the pandemic. In the past, PACCIN's programs relied heavily on in-person workshops and conferences, and we definitely hope to return to those forums in the future, but I'm excited about the new opportunities that have come to the forefront to connect with our peers online. I want to briefly describe what we're doing here before we start, as well as give a little background to how the series started. Before I get into that, though, I'd like to take care of a little housekeeping. I'm going to share our contact screen here. So you can see our website address as well as the email address to email me directly about these chats. I welcome any kind of feedback that you may have, and we're also looking for presenters of all levels of experience to help continue this series. Another thing to note is that our speakers will be taking questions after the presentation, and we ask that you pose your questions in the chat. We will be moderating the chat, and my co-host Matt and I will relay as many questions as we can. We ask that you please stay muted during and after the presentation, and also ask anyone who's on now to mute if they can. The group today is fairly large, and we would like to keep our sound feed clear and as organized as possible. I also want to note that PACCIN chats are recorded and will be made available on our website as soon as we can get them up. So introduce what we're up to here. PACCIN chats is an online virtual series of short presentations, interviews, and discussions on all sorts of topics of interest to the PACCIN community. PACCIN chats are intended to be a way for art preparation, collections care, and fine art services professionals to connect and share knowledge, as well as to be a forum to promote new voices and perspectives within the community. PACCIN chats are an evolution of an idea originated during quarantine for COVID-19 by Matthew Driggs, who is the supervisor of art installations at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. We're thankful to be partnering with Matt on this series, and I'm going to hand it over to him to talk a little bit about his series LACMA Chats that he started this spring. And Matt, I'll just let you start as soon as I stop sharing my screen here.
Okay, great, Jerry. I think you're still sharing.
I'm in my control here. There we go.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you, Jerry. Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Driggs. I'm the supervisor at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, installations and preparations. I started LACMA Chats early on during the COVID crisis, during the stay-at-home orders, as a way for my team to grow, learn, and reach out to other people. And we did that by having presentations and other kind of roundtable discussions. The one thing that it was very much centered around museum workers and how museum workers work within that industry. So I'm really glad to see PACCIN to take over this new arena and take over this idea, because we can open this up to more art industry workers. PACCIN, of course, represents all art handling workers in the field at large. So I'm really excited to be working with Jerry and Mark and the rest of the team. So thank you very much for having me. And Mark, I'll send it back to you.
All right, thanks, Matt. I just wanted to thank you, Matt, for the LACMA chats. I just wanted to get the opportunity to say that you really capture what the PACCIN is all about with our programs. It's basically sharing knowledge with your peer groups. So I really appreciate what you've done, and also appreciate all the speakers that gave all those presentations. I didn't get to see them all, but I saw a few, and they were really awesome. So you really started a good fire there, and we're trying to see what we can do to keep that going through our chats here. We also like to thank you for being the co-host. I hope you don't mind us swimming in your wake for a little while, because we want to make sure we don't sink here. So with that said, thanks for joining us. So as we move forward into the re-entry of the workplace this summer, PACCIN is going to provide some presentations and interviews and videos on how museums and fine art service companies are handling that transition. And today we handle that topic with two people. Our speakers are Meg Colbert, the Managing Director at BoxArt, and Derek Jones, the Executive Director of Atelier Fine Art Services. Both are co-founders of the Art Services Worker Safety Coalition. This coalition represents the collective effort of art service companies, international shippers, and public institutions who met remotely this spring to develop safety protocols for the workplace during the pandemic. There's a valuable wealth of information and resources provided on the coalition's website. And I'm glad to have Meg and Derek here with us today because I think it's important that those of you who don't know what they've been doing should know, because even though you might be in an institution, the guidelines, the safety guidelines they provided for fine art service workers really comply to how we interact in our business, day-to-day business with institutions and galleries and so forth. So with that said, I would like to introduce Meg and Derek. I'm going to just pass it on to you at this point. So thank you for coming today.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mark. I think that a good way to start this off would just be to share what the website for the coalition looks like so that everybody can kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. Is that visible to everybody? So the Art Services Worker Safety Coalition, it came out of actually an ARCS chat that Derek and I participated in, where it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and everybody was discussing sort of the logistics of how art would continue to be shipped and how we would continue to do our jobs. And it sort of came up that there was sort of a void about worker safety. And considering that for most of us who work in these sort of behind the scenes jobs, there's often not a lot of thought given to our experience in general. And in this situation, it seems pretty important that that changes and that we start thinking about the safety of these workers and also just what they can expect. And so that conversation led to the Art Services Worker Safety Coalition, which I've said this before, but in retrospect is a really long name, which should have been anagrammed or something. But the idea being that there's so many different types of people that work in this industry that it's really essential that some sort of universal agreement come about minimum standards. Sort of like the ones that you have where if you're going to be handling an artwork, everybody agrees that you have to wear gloves. And that's universal, basically. And if somebody showed up at your facility and they wanted to take a sculpture away, if they weren't going to put their gloves on, you probably wouldn't give them that sculpture. And that's accepted and everybody understands it. And so the idea was that if we could create universal guidelines, all of these different parties, from creators to people who are just doing rigging and transport, to museum services, to all the types of client services, institutional services, that all of those people could expect the same minimum protections and have the same expectations depending on wherever they were. And so we met a number of times and we came up with the universal guidelines, which I'll bring up on the screen now. And these universal guidelines are meant to be minimum guidelines, so that the idea being that they're not the most that you can do, but they're the least that you should do. So that, you know, just to begin with, that, you know, self-screening, people will social distance, people will wear masks, they'll obey maximum occupancy rules in spaces, and especially that if somebody's sick, they're not going to be working with you, they'll be sent home. And, you know, all of these are based off of, these guidelines are based off of many Zoom meetings and back and forths with people, but they're mostly coming from the CDC and WHO and New York State Department of Health and sources like that. So these are not sort of made up minimum standards. They're ones that came from organizations, and they're sort of collated, and we came to a consensus on what to include and what not to include.
And to develop that point a little bit, Meg, is that we had probably about 30 to 40 organizations, art services firms, museums, galleries, and the insurance companies all be part of this. So although Meg and I kind of led the coalition beginning, we're really not the soul of the coalition. There's really some really fantastic people from the industry involved with it. Mark's been involved with it. It's great to get everybody's insight on it because, as we were saying, it's one of these things where our sector, we're kind of quietly doing the job that nobody expects to be done. And we're often asked to do a lot of the risky things that people wouldn't ask other folks to do within the organizations that they're in. So we thought it was a good idea to get everybody together and get their thoughts. And Meg had some really great questionnaires that went out, compiled all this information. So it was really, to get to just this universal safety guidelines was, well, collectively, probably hundreds of hours of work to get everybody on the same page and really work through section by section what was the most important thing that you have a takeaway for your own organization or your own museum, or and even the universal guidelines kind of lead into the next part of our agreements. But the idea being that there is this minimum standard of care. And I apologize too, I'm on the side of the road in New Jersey. So if there's any audio problems, I do apologize.
Yeah, and just to kind of expand on that, like one of the things that was really important for when Derek and I first started talking about this was that, there is a lot of competition in our industry, even between non-for-profits. It's about, like, how do you pack a crate, right? That's a question that there's not one answer to that, even if you're talking about the same type of work. A lot of people have slight variations on that. And so we really felt it was important in this situation to sort of unbrand this effort and make it universal, so that it wasn't about atelier or box art or a museum or a specific workplace, but about recognizing that all of us as workers in this industry face a lot of the same situations. And so one of the things that we also came up with was an idea that, how do you encourage people to participate with these guidelines? Communication is very important, just like it is in our regular day-to-day jobs. We often send out prior agreements and things like that. We thought that it would be a really good idea to have an in-person safety agreement that parties would exchange with each other, so that everybody would, before any in-person appointment, make an agreement that they would wear a mask, social distance, provide space for the work crews, etc. And this has been pretty successful, and it's meant as sort of a boilerplate for two reasons. One, to give people a kind of framework so they don't have to come up with this on their own, but two, to make it so that it becomes recognizable and sort of part of the landscape, and people expect to start seeing it, which I think is also really important, is that we want to create a expectation of safety, so that people they're not going out of their way to ask for it. It's just an expectation that we all extend to each other. And then we came up also with a sample PPE chart, which goes through, and all of these are available in PDF on the website. So this sort of explains what the employer should provide, and that would also be for employers who were hiring freelance workers. They should provide these things for their freelance workers. And it kind of goes over various types of jobs and what you might expect to wear as a minimum in these jobs. And then finally, I would just like to bring up, before I pass it back over to Derek if he has anything else to say, is that we have a forum on here, and you have to become a member, but becoming a member is free. The idea was that when we first talked to the coalition, when we had meetings, people expressed that they didn't want the forum just available to everybody in the public. They wanted some sort of one step to get in, so that there was a member thing. And on this forum, there's lots of categories, and if you join and you wanted to add a category, you could just suggest it or request it, and we would add it in. But it hasn't been very active as of yet, I'm assuming because people are getting back to work, or maybe not enough people know about it. But we're really hoping that this will be a place that people start discussing issues. Like, what are you experiencing out there? Are these guidelines working? Are people adhering to them? And getting that feedback, I think, will be really important in helping us have more formal discussions with our clients or with our employers or employees, and making sure that we're protecting everybody in these situations where there's a possibility for people to be in a situation where they can't social distance, et cetera. Derek?
Yeah, and just popping on from what Meg said there too, you know, with all of this, with the universal safety guidelines, the in-person agreement, the PPE charts, obviously this is like an evolving situation. So we hope to keep the coalition really active. So Meg actually sent out another survey this morning, I think, or perhaps it was this morning. So the idea that as things evolve or may perhaps even devolve with the COVID situation, that we'll be able to adapt and change all of this so that there is just one singular basically go-to document that the industry can use and that the clients can not only adhere to, but actually ask that their vendors or that their staff adhere to. So we're hoping that that actually kind of gives everybody a voice and allows the staff to be able to push back on a client who might not be wearing PPE if we're going into a private client's home. And then just have this minimum standard that makes everybody feel really comfortable and safe coming back to work. That's the biggest thing. There's just a lot of unknowns with COVID, and there's a lot of fear with this. But we do think, you know, hopefully whenever this day does come post-COVID, that we can continue using the Art Services Workers Safety Coalition to develop some other, you know, unspoken things within our industry and fix those as well. So if we get everybody on that common agreement, perhaps we'll be in a better place as a group as a whole.
Yeah, and I'd just like to sort of add on to what Derek was saying is that, you know, obviously this coalition has no enforcement capability. So the only way that it works is with people sort of voluntarily signing on. And we do have an industry support page where if you'd like to go on there, you can see what companies and what organizations have signed on to say that they're going to use these universal guidelines. And then at the very bottom here, if you wanted to add your logo, you can add your logo in and we'll put it on the page. One thing is that, you know, for museums and institutions especially, there's a lot of passive power there to enforce these universal standards by asking that the vendors that you use, like creating companies or freelance art handlers even, that they abide by these standards. If you require that as part of your agreement for hiring someone, they're going to have to wear a mask. They're going to have to social distance, or they're not going to get the work. And that's really powerful right now. And it's going to protect a lot of workers if that's an expectation from the hiring client. I think it'll encourage a lot of responsible, good behavior if everybody sort of plays their part in, you know, encouraging these practices. I think that's about all I have to say on that as an overview, unless Derek, you have anything else you want to add in?
I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Great. Thank you, Derek and Meg. I went on the website a little bit earlier and I got to compliment you on how streamlined it is. It's very easy to go through, and I suggest everyone go and take a look at the website. It's well made. So
that is all Meg. Meg is 100% the website guru.
Yeah.
Excellent job, Meg.
Thank you.
We're going to open up this to questions. So people, if you have questions for Meg and Derek, that would be great. I'm going to start it off with a question here. I'm going to give you a scenario. So you have your in-person safety agreement, and let's say you're going up to a client's house. You walk up to the door. This person's already agreed to the in-person safety agreement, or not this person, but the house has already. And the person opens up the door. They're not wearing a mask. You're supposed to install 3 artworks on the wall, and the person refuses to wear a mask and says they have no idea about the in-person safety agreement. What would you I'll point this to Meg. What would you do in this scenario, Meg?
Well, this is a scenario that really requires that when you're sending your person out there into the situation, that you have really trained them on how they should respond. Because obviously it's already a pretty uncomfortable situation to have to say no to somebody in a situation like this. And so what I would suggest, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about this at BoxArt. And I mean, we even had an idea that there would be like a safe word that you could text back to your project manager, like banana, and it meant like they didn't have their mask on or whatever. And that's silly, and that didn't really come to fruition. But the idea being like, if you came there and the person said, you know, I don't have a mask, I won't wear a mask. You would want your employee to follow a script that you would provide them, something along the lines of, you know, I think there might have been a small misunderstanding. I just have to call back to the office. I'm just going to go over to my truck and stay far away from you, and I'm going to call back. And then they would call back to the office, and then at that point, it would be the employer's responsibility to explain to that client, that angry client possibly, that unless they wear a mask, we cannot complete this job. And I think that, yeah.
I'll give you real world. So we did it. So we basically, when somebody signs an estimate now, they have to click on the Art Services Worker Safety Coalition document, and we keep it specifically the coalition document. So we don't brand it as a Tellier. We want it really to be part of the coalition. But they have to docu-sign that they've read it. And we had a client that our staff showed up, and basically I told our staff, you call me or you call the director of logistics and we'll deal with it. And so it was a client of ours. They're obviously powerful people, and I just called them on their cell phone and told them my crew's leaving, you're paying me for half a day if you don't put on a mask. And 2 minutes later they had a mask on. So I think it's just, the idea is that you just have to put your foot down, and it does have to come from the top. You don't want the folks on the ground to have to be dealing with it. So, you know, I just told everybody in our company that if you find yourself in that position, call me, call John, call Travis, and we will deal with it, and just hold tight for a minute. And then if we can't come to some sort of agreement, which they've already signed off on, then we'll get out of there.
And I think it's important that that's why it's nice if it's sort of a boilerplate that's attached to the other agreements that you're sending over in this process. I would suggest highly that at the beginning of this, whatever communication you're having with your clients, it includes a discussion of these new protocols. So, you know, just so that you're aware, we now are following the universal guidelines as laid out in the Art Services Worker Safety Coalition, and we will not be participating in jobs where that agreement is not reciprocal or something like that, so that people aren't taken by surprise. Because a lot of this behavior is not necessarily malicious. You're dealing with a group of people or even a class of people who have never been told no before and are not used to, maybe even, I mean, I think maybe on a less controversial way, they're just it's hard for people to view themselves as a risk to other people. We're very conditioned to see other people as a risk to ourselves. And so, you know, turning that around is difficult for a lot of people. And so that's where you get a lot of that behavior. Like, I don't have to wear a mask, I don't have it. But they still want the guy in their house who's moving their art to wear that mask. So, you know, it's about being patient with that conversation as well.
Excellent. Yes, I completely agree. Sometimes we, the clients in that situation would be the people in power, and it'd be difficult sometimes to have those conversations. But it's important. It's important to have. And as Derek, you said, bring management in and bring it to the top. It's not on the individual worker to just be there and be that person saying no.
Absolutely. And I think as companies now, we're trying to get into more digital signatures and things like that. So, you know, the client's going to be looking at a waiver if they look at it or not, but they've agreed to it before they've gotten there. So hopefully that's enough to hold them to it.
But I also think, just to come at it from another angle too, I think this is why it's really important to continue these conversations, because, you know, right now we're at the beginning of like on the East Coast, we're starting to reopen and we're engaging with these jobs. But in a month, you know, there might be a really different attitude out there. People might not be as compliant, whatever. What we need is constant feedback to know what we need to reinforce, where we need to retrain, and the conversations we need to be having with all the parties involved in these jobs. So I think it's, you know, one thing to really emphasize is engagement. Like, we need to engage with each other as a community, you know, even if it means working with people we might not normally be collaborating with, like, you know, BoxArt and Atelier collaborating together doesn't, you know, maybe before this wouldn't seem like a normal thing, but, you know, it's a positive that all of these different companies can come together and really work together to craft something that works for all of us, protects all of us. And I think it just to reemphasize again, it's part of an ongoing thing. It doesn't end once the guidelines are put out there or once these documents are crafted. We need to get feedback from our people to know that it's working.
On that note, I have a question. Have the feedback you've gotten so far, I know you mentioned that it's been kind of on the light side, has that caused any reevaluations or changes so far of places actually opening up and then giving feedback on the protocols so far?
I mean, we've had a couple of situations where, you know, definitely this is just like our first week of being back at work, and already we've had a couple situations that required like 3 extra phone calls, sort of like what Derek was describing. But I think that one thing that we're also trying to do with the coalition is create some standard risk levels that would be clear kind of outlines of what types of jobs based on where you are would be acceptable to take on. So like maybe your community is has an outbreak. You might only be doing level 1 jobs, which minimal contact, curbside pickup, you know, no contact release, those kind of things. And then level 3 is all the way up to like a crew being inside somebody's apartment wrapping artworks. And defining those risk levels, I think, is really important to give everybody a framework so that when somebody calls up and says, I want you to pack 6 people into my apartment and wrap 1,000 artworks, you can say, I'm sorry, that sort of sounds like a level 3, and we're only on the level 2 phase right now. Just to give another common language. I'm a big proponent of common vocabularies, or at least defining what you're talking about. I mean, I think this is true in our industry, like, what's a crate? What's a box? You know, like, there's a lot of answers to those questions. A lot of people use a lot of slightly different vocabulary to describe these things. And this is a situation where common vocabulary is going to be really important going forward, because it's going to help us understand the real risks that we're facing and how we're reacting to that.
And Jerry, I mean, we just dealt with this week. We have a crew that's down in Florida that came from New York, and now they're saying that anybody that comes back from Florida needs to quarantine for 2 weeks. So it's interesting when, you know, the things are changing so quickly that you can't predict what's going to happen. So, you know, like, we're in constant communication with our crew and just talking to them, you know, what are we going to do when we get back? You know, the first thing they're going to do is go get a COVID test like the minute they get back. And so it's just this process that there's not a really solidified answer to everything except to be flexible and as accommodating as possible. I mean, I think that's really all we can do at this moment. You know, just make sure everybody's safe and try to keep, you know, not just the company safe, but our whole sector safe.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to throw out some more scenarios at you guys, if you don't mind, Meg and Derek. Lots of semi-trucks go from Los Angeles to New York, artworks created. What happens when a courier is needed? And I read some of your guidelines of only having 2 people in a truck. How would that scenario work out?
So right now it's not working out. So we're not allowing any couriers in the truck. So we're just, you know, there's some companies out there that are, Articheck is doing an alpha test of a virtual courier. So we're working the alpha test with them on that. But, you know, Meg, I don't know if our feeling is that we're not allowing anybody in the truck with us. So we're happy to try to come up with a creative solution otherwise. But as a company, you know, we have to draw the line in the sand there. And there's really no safe way to introduce a 3rd person to a truck. And honestly, I don't think it's safe for that courier, and I don't think it's safe for the employees. So, you know, that's our current line in the sand. And actually, Meg drafted up some 3 different levels of service right now. And even in level 3, which we're considering, our level 1 is the safest. Level 3 is as we get further along, but in none of those levels do we consider it pre-COVID. So we don't even have a plan for going back to what pre-COVID was. That's up to the government to get us some vaccines, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think just considering the risk that an infection poses to anybody, you know, it just, we are an industry where we're used to bending over backwards to get the job done. And we're always, you know, our mantra is always to put the art first. But this is a moment to step back and say there is a human cost to some of these jobs, and we need to be aware of the risk that people are taking when they do certain things. And 3 people in the cab of a truck, or 2 people that don't normally work together, that's not a risk I think I would ask any one of my employees to take. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the courier, as Derek was saying. But, you know, the other options like would be a follow car, or, you know, end-to-end couriering, which is something more people are talking about now. And then there are those people who are saying that, well, what if they've already had COVID-19? Can they, I don't know, travel about and be the, you know, I don't know. But yeah, I think there's a lot is going to change in the next year about how these normal practices work.
Yes, so I think a lot of it is going to, it's time, and more information that we know, the more information that can be given. Tagging along on that long distance trucking idea, 2 semi-truck drivers, they're going across country for 15 days. There's only 2 in the cab. Would both of those guys need to be wearing masks the whole time?
In theory, yes, but I can tell you practically, I already noticed it with our crew that was on a 2-week job together during a pack, that when they got back, they were much more comfortable with each other than they were when they had left. So, you know, in theory, yes, everybody should always be wearing a mask when you're that close. We put in vinyl separators between the 2 crew just in case somebody could cough. But what they were saying was, like, in a truck, you know, you're drinking, you're eating, you're doing all these things. And when you do that, you don't have your mask on and you're within that 6 feet. So what's the difference? And, you know, honestly, it becomes practical for everybody. So what we've done and what we suggest people do, and this has come up more in our forum calls than it has really on any guidelines, but we silo our pairs of people so that they're always working with the same person. And our thought internally was that we would have that every group is color coded, so that you would know if they ever would potentially cross contaminate one another. But that crew is designated for 3 months to work together. So it's I see quarantine buddies, and that is that's exactly what it is. So those crews work together, and we tried to, and, you know, internally at Atelier, what we did was we asked people, hey, do any of you guys hang out outside of work still, you know, and do you do this and do that? And there was a bunch of groups of people that they're just buddies outside of work. So they might see too much of each other and be really sick of each other in 3 months, but at least we know they're safe because they're hanging out outside of work. Some of them are roommates. And then the other crews that we paired up, we really went to in-depth conversations with them to make sure that those pairs were comfortable with one another.
We're doing something similar like that at our museum, where we're pairing up 2 people, and we kind of consider it like pods. And when more people need to get together, it's the same pod that comes together, so that there's not kind of this, I don't want to call it cross contamination, but just so that it stays within that one group. And that's been very helpful. Jerry, you got any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I know that in previous conversations I've watched about this, there was quite a bit of concern about surface contamination. You know, can crates be contaminated? You know, I know that at one of the facilities we use a different pin every time when we're signing, or like not using pins at all. However, with crates, are you suggesting any quarantine time for crates or things like that?
We actually just sort of sent out something for people for our next meeting for us to discuss as something to approve or say no to, which is disinfecting of handles of crates and then isolating crates where possible when they come into a facility, which I think, you know, there's a lot of, you know, obviously there's a lot of updates with the virus, like, you know, and this doesn't mean that things are that it's not real. It's that we learn more about these things. And so now maybe there's less emphasis on transmission from surface contact. But I would say that talking to many people, they still want to feel comfortable when they're handling these objects. And it's one thing to talk about surface transmission when you are sitting at a desk and your job is to work at a computer and you maybe go to the grocery store. It's another thing when you're a person who receives 20 or 30 crates a day coming from various parts of the globe into your warehouse and you're touching each one of those. And maybe the risk is not significant or as significant as person-to-person contact, but I think that if it makes that person feel more secure to gently disinfect using a damp cloth or a Lysol wipe or something like that, the handle of a crate, I'm all for it. I think that that should always be paired with hand washing. Like that's part of the real habit that people should get into, is making sure that they have good hygiene habits and that they're doing that more than anything else. But I think that, I think that's just sort of maybe a preference thing.
Yeah, and I think, early on when we first opened up and it was still in the midst of all of this, when they were UV wanding every sheet of plywood that came in the building, and it was tedious. And then, as Meg was saying, things got updated. So it seems like, as a consensus, it is that wiping down handles and wearing gloves while handling the crate is the best way to go. I don't think there's any problem if we can extend the acclimation period instead of 24 hours and make it 48 hours, then all for it. I think that's a great idea. So we tried to broach this subject now probably 6 weeks ago, and there was really no consensus on it. But now that there's been some updates by the CDC and all the articles that come out every other day, I feel like everybody has a better comfort level and is more concerned with just wear gloves or wipe the handle down at this point.
And I had one collection manager say to me, well, if it makes it more likely that you'll handle our work, then yeah, do whatever you have to do so that we can get our crates. So, I think that it sounds like there's not a lot of disapproval. Obviously, you wouldn't want to disinfect artwork, or, that would be like the big thing to make super clear to whoever is doing this that this is lightly done, very carefully, and not near artwork.
Why don't you just describe to me, we get lots of crates coming into the museum. What is the handoff for crates? A truck pulls up, a straight truck pulls up, and there's a large crate that needs 4 people to handle it. Could you describe that, how that handoff would happen?
Do you want me to take that, Mike? So what we've been doing is, if there's a crate that needs 4 people, what we ask their crew to do is open up their truck and let our team go in, so that there's not all of us in the back of the truck at once. That's been our process. I think I'm sure there's been a truck that showed up and needed 4 people and there was only 2 on the dock. And so perhaps they were halfway in there, but the ideal situation would be is that only one crew would be in the back of the truck at a time, and that we're not cross-contaminating those crews. And again, doing digital BOLs and things like that also helps, as far as the touch surface and things like that.
And this is something too where I think it's important for workplaces. If you're receiving something, it's really a responsibility at this time to consider your crew and what you're actually capable of doing, and not just kind of go at things like everything is normal and you can put 12 people on a crate. It might be something that, if you don't have to do that right now, obviously there's lots of situations where there's not that option, but consider like carefully selecting these jobs or trying to plan them so that they can be done with more social distancing if possible.
I'd like to mention, you were talking about training earlier, and it looks like the way this is going to be very fluid in the coming months. It's going to be more than once. It's been mentioned before, the training is going to be retraining, as well as things get more developed and we have more understanding of what we're dealing with and where the risks are. training and retraining, but also engagement. And I think that's something you mentioned before, Derek, in the past or recent past. Engaging your employees and getting involved and asking questions and then expressing their concerns is so crucial, and making sure everybody gets on the same page. So when we go out to do the job, everybody's confident that they can do it safely and know what to do if a situation comes. And we're going to have case-by-case scenarios all the time. It sounds like we've already had a few in these discussions, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on that with the engagement of your employees.
Yeah, so what we've done is, it was pretty simple, is we just set up a channel basically via an app that everybody is specifically to COVID-19. And so anything that comes up, they can tag it or, say, hey, I came across this situation. And then what we also did is we took the OSHA, there's an OSHA COVID test, there's the Art Services Worker Safety Coalition guidelines. And then there was our municipalities suggested reopening procedures. We turned that into a Google form so that all the crew has to take that test. And so we had done that when they got onboarded, came back to work, and have to take this test and score well on it. And then we were Meg and I were on another call with DeWitt Stern, and they suggested, recurrent training. And so we actually just started doing that as well. So every 2 weeks, everybody has to take that test again. So just the idea to keep it current in your mind, that it's not over, that these things are going to keep on evolving. And so that is the way to do it. I think it's just really, truly open line of communication. And we're one of those companies where everybody's cell phone. They can call me or anybody at midnight if there's a problem, if they are losing sleep over it. So it's been pretty simple and straightforward for us. But I think as the organization either gets bigger or more top-down structure, it might get a little harder. So I think just making sure that you have, I don't want to say your most fearful employee in that position, but having somebody that is very cognizant of COVID being your safety manager for COVID, I think is really important. Not having the most cavalier person in the company being your safety manager, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really important to take people's concerns seriously. And, one of the things, we do it a little differently at FoxArt. We're a little smaller than Atelier, so we just have an all company Zoom meeting, and before the meeting, we'll send out surveys and things like that. And, getting people to speak is really important. Sort of getting those barriers broken down so they can say, yeah, this isn't going to work for me. Or, this is not a realistic thing for me to be expected to do on site. So one of the things that when we first had our first all company Zoom, where we're talking about challenges, what do you see as challenges coming up? A number of people were like, how am I supposed to say to one of the richest people on the planet, put on a mask? And that was, tense, but it's a real conversation that we had to have. And I think it's not as simple as just saying you are empowered to walk away. You have to really get in there and say be listening, be present, and really get in there to provide solutions for people. Otherwise, they're going to feel left alone in these situations.
I agree. I think having the meetings helps provide the employees that are out in the field come back with real case scenarios. So this forum will continue to grow and expand, as you said earlier, because we're going to test the waters and we're going to find out what works and what doesn't. And it's definitely going to be a slower pace, right? Wearing masks all the time is hard to do if you haven't done it yet. People that have been doing it say there's more breaks, and most people can last for a period of time, but a full day with a mask on, if you're working together as a group, is very exhausting. So there's ways of working around that. But I think the engagement of a group, a team, regardless what kind of institution they're in, to really make it work, it's that clarity and everybody on the same page of how to deal with these situations, because it's going to be ongoing for weeks and months. We're going to be challenged so many times in the future, and all of us collectively are going to have to deal with that, because it's a large group of people involved in any one action, a fine art service company functions, right? You got private collectors and institutions involved, and maybe a shipper as well, but international shipper. But yeah, I think that's key, and I think I think the coalition being a fluid activity, and people being able to still join and be a part of that conversation is very important. And I think people should be aware of that if you're really interested in seeing how this continues to get involved, or at least sign up and get the notices and see the conversations so you can see what's out there, because, you know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Somebody's already figured out how to make the wheel roll, right?
Yeah, just to reiterate, we really welcome people coming in, and if anybody would like to participate in any one of the Zoom meetings, they can simply just email the coalition. The email address is on the first page of the website. Just request the Zoom link and it'll be sent to you. We want to hear people's voices, and we want the conversation to be multi-tiered and rich, and to involve a lot of the different sectors of our industry. You know, just as a sort of aside, I've been really surprised at how easy these Zoom meetings have been. There's a shocking amount of agreement and consensus, and which is something that, you know, I would say in the industry, when I've had conversations with people who do not work in my company, often if you're talking about something like what material is best to use in this situation, or how would you put this artwork on this shelf, like there's like 10 opinions, and it's often kind of contentious in a, you know, in a positive, and I think, you know, a good way. But it was very interesting to me how easy it's been, where everybody is really just kind of focused on safety, and I'm surprised at how single-minded everybody has been in the most positive way.
Thank you. I want to pass along a question from the chat. It's a little more of a specific question. It's from Kate Montlock, and it's building off the discussions of teams carrying large crates. Often our crew works with the team on the truck to unload and unload. I also enter the back of the truck to make sure the packing is what it needs to be. Should we expect that this is no longer acceptable for receiving teams to enter the truck? And can you discuss digital BOLs, if that's by email or on a tablet or anything like that you have experience with?
Yeah, so I think that what we're dealing with the truck is we ask, so if a vendor shows up to one of our warehouses, that they just open the back of the truck, and then we go and actually remove the piece. We have loaded a truck that was not our truck, and then had their team just confirm that the strapping and everything was right. I think you can kind of bridge that gap by doing that, but it's honestly a lot of clear communication between our handling firm and the museum or the institution or the gallery, whatever that may be, beforehand, so that they know that that's what you're going to do prior to them arriving. And then as for digital BOL, we went for was we create this digital BOL and we build it while we're with the client. And then we send it as a PDF. They get it. It's a DocuSign, so they have to click on a couple links. It then comes back to us, and our crew would then do the reverse, and we would then DocuSign it, countersign it, and then the final version gets emailed. So it's about 5 minutes longer than it was before. It definitely takes some time. You need to have internet connection. There's always like a backup paper BOL on the front of the truck in case for whatever reason it doesn't work. But it is completely touchless. It just takes a little bit longer.
And I mean, I think that this will be a place where you see less consensus, because it's about the particular capabilities of each company. Not everybody has the ability at this moment to be paperless in these things. So I would just put out there that, you know, not a lot of people are going to be able to afford the technology at this moment if they don't already have it. So I would just suggest always like carry your own pen, don't touch other people's pens, you know, that kind of thing. Sort of the little.
And I think Meg's 100% on that. I mean, we just happen to be in a position where we have a full-time IT guy because He's been building database for us for the last 4 years. So it's just easy for us to adapt what we already have, but not everybody has such an adaptable platform. And we got it as a company, and I think Foxtrot is probably in the same position where we're very paperless. We're very, we've been like that for the last 5 years. So when this COVID situation hit, it actually didn't affect our business operations all that much, except the face-to-face time and the actual art handling and, fabrication. But as far as the office workflow, it didn't really affect us all that much. And that was purely because we were already going digital. It had nothing to do with COVID. So again, it's easier for us to do that because we already had a digital BOL developed. We just had never implemented it. And then the software that we have and our IT manager, which is able to crank it out pretty quickly.
Mark was talking about things being much slower and with face masks and stuff. And at the museum, we've been at work for I think about 2 weeks now, 2.5 weeks now. After 1 week of working, on Monday night, I was sick and I wasn't feeling well. And per the museum requirements, if you're sick, you're supposed to, I'm not sure if you're supposed to get tested, but you're definitely supposed to see a doctor. So I wasn't able to go back to work after 1 week of working. And I got tested, saw the doctor, got cleared, but all of that took a week. So, thinking about slowing down and everything. What would you suggest for other art shipping companies, like an employee gets sick, feeling sick, COVID symptoms? What type of procedures should be in place there?
Well, I think for what we've done right now at Box Art during what we're calling a transition period, and this is obviously not going to be an option for every company. Every company has different economic realities, but we've created basically something where our staff gets a kind of minimum guaranteed pay. So they can get more than that if they work more, but they're automatically going to get a minimum amount of pay. And the idea behind this was that it would encourage people to report if they're sick because they wouldn't lose money if they got sick. And so basically everyone's kind of on a salary, not really, but I think that those kind of policies will encourage people to be honest about their health. Obviously there's still a lot of privacy concerns with talking to employees about illness and sickness. So, it's on the employer to still obey the law about HIPAA violations and ADA and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that if an employee is showing symptoms, you want an environment that encourages that person to want to stay home and not try to come in to make some money because otherwise they're going to be broke. So anything that an employer can do to make that choice easier for the employee, I think in this period, it's a temporary period. I think that's, I would argue it's an ethical obligation of the employer, maybe even.
Yeah, and we're doing something probably a different way, but basically so shout out to Josh, our IT manager. He created an app so when you log in for work, you have to take a photograph of the thermometer so that and register your temperature. And so if your temperature is over 100.1, I think it is, then it's a red flag and it gets flagged, and then it alerts your partner that they've been red flagged as well. And the idea, and there's protocol behind that, which is they have to leave. So they just have to leave the building right at that moment. So, and we get the managers get notifications that they've been red flagged. And what we said is, hey, that first day, we're going to pay you for sure. Like, let's just go figure out what's going on. You guys go to the doctor, go get tested, and let's take 8 hours to figure out what's happening. And then we'll take the approach from there. So the idea was that at least, we would get some sort of sense of, is this for real? Is it not? And, we've had a couple people that just didn't feel well. So they went to go get a COVID test and took about 3 days to get the results back. And so, luckily both of those one was on a Thursday and one was on a Friday. So they were back on Monday and no problems. But, we haven't had that experience where it was like a 2-week turnaround on the test yet. So, I guess, obviously we'll deal with that next, but that there is, now federally mandated requirements of pay for COVID at this point. So the employees really shouldn't have to worry about that at this point. So there's different tiers in that federal mandate. It's an interesting and kind of bureaucratic way of doing it, but it does align to make sure the staff member would not be financially encumbered by it if they did get COVID.
You know, we also had recently a job come in where they they asked that we certify that our employees were healthy. And so it's kind of interesting as a thing where it's like, well, what does that mean? Like, you know, do we have to get them tested before the job? Obviously, testing takes the turnaround time to get the answers of the test could be up to 2 days or longer. So when do you do this? And then what, I mean, it just opens up a whole kind of thing. Do we pay for the time that the employee goes to take this test? Do we pass that on to our client? Those are all very interesting things. And it's coming out of an institution being very careful about who comes into their workplace. So I think it's something that, again, we're going to have to continue to have these conversations, because while that seems like a very responsible thing for an institution to say, we want all outside vendors to certify that they do not have COVID-19, but it actually causes a ripple effect. Maybe it causes the price of the job to go up. And then there's all these questions like, how do you certify that? Is it acceptable to force an employee to go get a test to do their job? These are questions that are not necessarily clear right now.
Yeah, it's quite open.
And yeah, I think the problem is that there is no real federal guideline to how to do that. So, when our New York team came back, they all got the COVID test, but there's also a life cycle to it, right? So even though you wait 4 days, you could have still gotten COVID between the tests. And so it's honestly a slippery slope that I don't think a business has an answer to, but I don't think society has an answer to it at this point, to be honest. I think, if you have COVID, then the bells and alarms go off and then they do the tracing. But otherwise, it's everybody's best guess and best practices that you can do, I guess, at this point to try to make the safest decision possible.
Another question. This is going back to you were talking about having procedures when you're dealing with outside parties and how difficult it may be to ask, say one of the richest people in the world to put on a mask. Taking it the other way, and you may have alluded to this already with talking about the culture of engagement and communication, but sometimes I find the hardest person to talk to is not someone in an outside party, but perhaps a coworker. And you had mentioned cavalier coworkers. So what's your suggestion for, say, management of any sort of company in dealing with this kind of issue?
I would say that it's always easiest to get people, in regular times, being a manager is really hard, especially when maybe you've been a peer with those people, which I think is often the case in a lot of our industry. And I would say it's always easier to kick that bad news up. Hey guys, I know this sucks, but the lady upstairs says you got to wear a mask. And so I would really emphasize to management that is a tool that they can pull out of their pocket and use at any time. But also in group trainings, emphasize how important it is for people to for peers to enforce these rules. So that, with the idea being it's not just about telling them to wear their mask, it's about telling them to wear their mask so their manager doesn't have to. You're looking out for your buddy, you're making sure they're not going to get in trouble. And I think those are all sort of sound management approaches to kind of dealing with this situation. And then just, kind of going overboard on signage, and then just having recurrent meetings and lots of very public talks where you're re-emphasizing over and over again that it's not an option. You have to obey these rules.
Yeah, and I think, again, too, going back to that idea, go to where the buck stops. And so, at Atelier, I tell everybody, if you see anything you're uncomfortable with, just text me. I'll deal with it. They won't know it's coming from you. And even a little further than that, our fellow that's the head of maintenance for us, like he's my mole. So I just tell him, like, you ever see something, come up to my office, tell me right away that somebody's not doing something right, and I'll go deal with it. And so, you know, I think, and nobody ever knows really who's the mole. So it's kind of great. So, you know, everybody's now figured out it. They figured it was Teddy, so they got there. It all got figured out. It took about a week, but then everybody figured out it was Teddy. But I mean, I think it's good to have people that are in your organization that are willing to, you know, not willing to waver on their moral standards over, you know, fear of their the coworkers. So, and I think if you have those people in your organization, kind of go to them to be the sage advice and come to you and let you know when something's going on.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, in regular times, people are often thinking about these kind of things. Like, you know, I saw him, he's, you know, every time he goes to wrap something, he's doing it, he stands the artwork up while he does it, or he doubles up the tape in a way where he has to push it near the face. Those people, like, use those people. Those are the people that are going to care, and get them on your side and get them, and create an environment where, like Derek was saying, people can report things anonymously. Without, you know, without feeling like they're snitching or something like that.
Great. Jerry, I know we had said that we weren't going to have people comment verbally, but our comment section seems to be pretty light. So if there's anybody that prefers to ask a comment now before we end this session, please come forward. I'm going to pass it on to you, Jerry. Let you finish this out.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you, Meg and Derek, for all of this. This has been amazing and really wonderful to have you speak about this. Also want to thank Matt for partnering with me on this and PACCIN. Just want to pass along that stay tuned. PACCIN Chats number 2 is going to be posted to our website soon. It wasn't a live event. It's going to be an interview, but it'll be posted. You can watch it. And PACCIN Chats number 3, we have planned for July 10th. So please stay tuned for that. Again, you can email me at paccinchats@gmail.com for registering. Also, we would love to have more people presenting. This forum is intended to be easy and fun to do. And so no experience necessary, and I can help coach through any sort of presentations that need help. So thank you again, and appreciate all you attending. Have a good
Thank you guys very much. We really much appreciate it. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meg and Derek. Thank you much. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
And everybody
Appreciate you
else.
guys.
Thank you.
Everybody be safe.